So before we get started, I want to introduce a few different panel members. So first, Greg Fitzpatrick. He has 25 years of experience in this industry, focused mostly on the HVAC part of this world, and certainly has spent a lot of time the last 10 years focused more on cybersecurity as it relates to building automation. Stephen Hulicky with Tritium. We lease their product manufacturing over there. Obviously, cyber is a very big deal for people making hardware that's plugging into networks. Tritium's been connecting to IP networks since their inception. So excited to have him here as well. And then Jim McGlone, who's got more of an industrial automation background, starting with Navy Nuke and then heading into process control. But spent a good portion of his career also focused on cybersecurity as it relates to industrial automation. So happy to have all of them here. So Greg, I want to start off with you. You've seen the audience out here. Looks like we've got probably 50% system integrators and then a smattering of every other profession. So what do you want to start us off with?
Well, one of the things that, like you said, I spent probably 25 years or so in a pretty diverse world, right? I started off as a consulting engineer, ran my own firm for years, worked for a couple large manufacturers, selling controls and equipment, turnkey projects, and things like that. And I've also worked on the owner side, right, as a director of facilities. Now I'm with Cochrane Supply Engineering as their business development leader for IoT and integration. So in my 25 plus years, I've seen a lot. And one of the things I always like to talk about is how our industry has taken a sharp left turn, especially when it comes to implementing IP technology, right? So most engineering firms I've talked to, they look at controls and building management systems as fire protection. They treat it like fire protection. They put out a performance spec or they take someone's specification, drops it in there, and they don't do anything but highlight Tritium and highlight back and keep it moving, right? So what we've tried to do is start putting together things like systems integration drawings and things like that, so we can show all the hardware and software that's involved in the integration process. But not only that, making sure that cybersecurity is actually addressed and that engineers are cyber aware. And what does that look like from an engineering or a design standpoint, right? We recommend a few different, just really basic things like making sure that you're dealing with encrypted data, whether you're dealing with a software like Niagara that has encrypted data or soon to come BACnet SC, right? And the other thing you want to make sure that you're implementing into your design is managed switches when you're looking at the network, right? We don't want unmanaged switches out there. We don't want other networks in our building like shadow networks and things like that that you're not familiar with. Now we're talking about a few different things when we're talking about larger enterprise customers who have IT and OT convergence plans. There's already a plan in place to separate the two, and all those security policies are in place and things like that. But what about the developer that has the 10-story office building, right? If they know they're going to have remote connectivity, what does cybersecurity look like for them? So when you're talking about designing systems, encrypted data, managed switches when it comes to your OT network, and you want to make sure that you implement a firewall, specify a firewall, and specify the rules that should come along with that firewall. Those are the basic things that you should look at. So from a basic standpoint, make sure you start off there when it comes to design.
All right, thanks, Greg. So kind of feeding off of that, Stephen, obviously there's a couple different avenues that Greg just took there, from when you actually get to design the network versus when you're coming into an enterprise that has a network. You're making product that have to live in both environments, right? So what are the things that you look at to make sure that your product is secure and can live safely in both of those worlds?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, it starts with venues like this. You got to hear what the customer demands are. I mean, that's how we build the right functionality into the product. We have to be more than within an earshot of your needs. And so when a new specification requirement comes along, those are things that we want to be aware of, especially if it's something that we don't support. Here it is, the product. So, just I guess to provide an example, BACnet Secure Connect obviously is one that's going to be on the menu for this session for good reason. BACnet it's just done so much. In fact, I heard yesterday that I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we had BACnet was being specified 64% specifications for building automation. Now it's at 78%. That's huge. So, but the thing is that those existing specifications, do you think it has Secure Connect in it? It does not. It does not. And for the most part, we've seen some folks out there who have gone to the lengths of despecifying BACnet over IP. So they'll use serial or MSTP for the meantime. But with Secure Connect coming out, I think everyone's starting to make that natural pivot. And the reason why is because it's a reflection of BACnet over IP is insecure. I mean, it's an inherent nature, right, of the UDP. And if you have access to that network, I can snip every one of those packets. I can figure out what's going on. And that's something that, of course, as an enterprise, even as like a mom and pop shop, you don't want to allow that at all. So, BACnet Secure Connect obviously is going to be that first kind of opportunity to address that. And I think we're going to get some speed in that. But at the end of the day, Brian, it's sessions like this. Please stop by the booth as well if you want to have a discussion about this in addition to it, because we really want to hear from you. We want to hear what we need to include in the product to ensure you're successful and, more importantly, secure.
All right, thanks. Jim, I'm trying to get you focused on from an industrial automation standpoint. They've obviously been worried about cyber attacks for a lot longer than building automation world. And I would say that in a lot of the industrial facilities, you are dealing with corporate IT, and there are VLANs, and there are well-protected networks that these systems have to exist on. How important is cybersecurity at the device level, as Steve was just talking about, when you're in a fairly heavily cyber-protected environment already?
Great question. First of all, I'm really impressed all you guys are here. That's pretty amazing, actually. I know years ago when we talked about cybersecurity in this industry, and I was in this industry for 5 years with Tritium. At Tritium, I left and went into the cybersecurity industry in Washington, D.C. and did some very bizarre and strange things, which was quite exciting. And I'm the guy who actually shows up on sites and at Barnier and figures out whether or not a gas plant or refinery or chemical manufacturer is cyber secure. That's a challenge, to be honest with you. It's a huge challenge. You guys are driven by refineries and things like that in the past in your life. They're massive facilities, and this is a big building and it's got a lot of I/O. But the reality is that it is a relatively well-defined space. We pretty much know how the stuff's connected. It is a manageable problem in this industry, and I don't want you to think that cybersecurity is something to be afraid of. It's just something to embrace and learn. In the last session, there was a lot of discussion about mentoring people, being an apprentice and trying to learn more as yourself. I did that. When I left Tritium, I literally said, I don't know enough about cybersecurity. I need to go learn this industry. Sounds really weird for a guy who used to split atoms on a submarine. I spent a lot of years at Rockwell Automation, traveling the world, doing business for them, helping them develop businesses. But I think the thing I would add that I think is really key to the difference or the lack of difference is that there really isn't a huge difference. The industrial guys have been struggling with this for a long time. Discrete manufacturing, continuous process, they're not there yet. They're probably a little bit further ahead than the smart building industry is, but they still come up way short. They still make mistakes. They don't add things like, they don't do remote access correctly. They put in the same kind of firewalls at layer 3.5 as they did at layer 5 between the internet and their corporation. And it's frustrating. So I would say it's a good thing to learn about the ISA 62443. Did anybody know what the ISA 62443 standard is? One hand, two hands. Okay, a few more. I was about to throw rocks at the cyber guys over there. So the International Society of Automation has a standards body that 99 standards body that's actually created a industrial automation standard that has the IEC has adopted, and it is a truly global standard now. I'm on the 99 standards body, so I'm not going to, I don't, full disclosure, I'm not promoting it or anything else. I don't care whether you follow it or not, but I would suggest you get to know it, understand it, and embrace it. It really is, even though we use different network protocols, BACnet, LAN, Modbus, stuff like that, even though we use different network protocols than they do, they're running over Ethernet now. We're talking about putting 2-wire Ethernet into buildings so we don't have to run twisted pair like we used to. So we're actually going to, in newer buildings, start actually increasing the number of devices that are basically potentially hackable, all the way down to the very smallest device level. So you can buy a converter today that takes Ethernet, a Cat5 cable signal, it converts it down to a 2-wire signal and hook an Ethernet device up. The industrial markets go in there. I know I've talked to a lot of the guys, integrators and stuff in this market, people that are bidding jobs and stuff. They're not being asked to do it yet, but they're curious because they can see a labor savings. They can see actually being able to configure, test, figure out what's wrong in the building very easily now from a remote connection all the way down to the smallest device. So it's going to happen. And the problem with that is when you start bringing it all the way down to the smallest device, is you've just created an even larger attack vector for people that are trying to attack a building. All right. And the problem we have, and what you have in common with the industrial automation world, is that the machines that we're running potentially could really harm people or cause a lot of physical damage. I know we think about cybersecurity in this industry sometimes as, hey, we don't have any personal data in the machines. Who cares, right? It's a machine. Well, it stopped being a machine the day you plug it into the Ethernet cable. All right. So it is something you have to take very seriously. Did I answer that question?
Not at all.
All right.
Sorry. I'll come back to it. We've got lots of time. So I want to, I'm curious for the system integrators out here, how many of you are still trying to avoid IT when you need remote connectivity, trying to work around it? Nobody. One honest guy out here, that's all. And for you IT people, how many use that bother? Oh, one of them. All right. That's good. That's pretty low. Yeah. Yeah. So it's dangerous. I work with several different enterprise clients, and one that we worked with, I won't mention the name, but they had, I don't know, maybe out of 1,000 buildings, 800 of them had some extra way to get access to their building systems that they didn't even know about. That should scare all of you if you're really thinking about it. I mean, that is not an effective way to be cybersecure. It's an effective way to get hacked and to be on the news, but it's not an effective way to be secure. So how, and we also know there's also been the horror stories, all the reasons why. Like, I don't want to act like system integrators didn't have good reason for some of their decisions when it comes to that. And one of the things that we still see out there is some of the IT organizations want to treat building systems like they treat computers. And how have you experienced that? And what kind of impact does that have? And then what are we doing as an industry here to educate the IT organizations of the special requirements of the devices that are on their network? Greg, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, well, I'll give you my theory on what we should be doing. All right. Well, for me, based on my background, I look at cybersecurity and say to myself, what is IT doing to push those policies or the relevant policies and best practices from IT over to OT? And not just to the enterprise customers or enterprise owners, but to the average person that's developing a 10-story office building, right? So what does that look like? What does the plan look like? How do we get owners' project requirements on the IT or cybersecurity side over to these projects when they're passing them along to the consulting engineers? Like engineers right now, when I look at projects that are coming through our office, I don't see anything that touches on cybersecurity whatsoever. There's not even a firewall actually specified. So how do we put together owners' project requirements and put together best practices so they get out into the entire industry, not just the enterprise customers.
Yeah.
And I think we start there.
So I'm curious of you MSIs out there, how many of you spend time with the consulting engineers, the end users, and developers talking specifically about cybersecurity? That's a big part that's got to change.
Right.
That's got to change because really the MSI, you know, as I define it, I'm not sure Scott's going to agree with me. He'll change it later in the session if he needs to. But if you're going to be an MSI, you're really not necessarily responsible for any of the vertical systems. I'm not the HVAC contractor. I'm not the electrical contractor. I'm not even the networking contractor. But what I am is the person that's supposed to be representing the cyber secure way for all of these systems to share data, to be accessible, to be configurable, and to work properly and safe. So that's what I should be as an MSI. Right now, I think there's too many MSIs that are still focused on one of those verticals, and they don't have the time to spend at that horizontal layer, really helping this thing come true. So what do you guys think about that? And Stephen, how are you building tools that can help an MSI be more intelligent about how your systems and your products need to fit on it?
It's a great question. So I think first it has to start with the specification, have to be, or the training, the empowerment. You have to give the system integrators the right know-how on how to configure a secure instance. And we have a hardening guide we publish. It's available for everyone. If you haven't taken a look at it and you're currently managing an Niagara instance, please do. It's available publicly. So just type in Niagara hardening guide and download it, and it'll walk you step by step of what represents the most secure posture that you can implement in your instance. But I think that's just step one, right? Step two is building in the right functionality within the product that ensures you're actually walking the system integrator through the journey. So as, for example, let's say, just even creating a user. I mean, Greg touched on it, just talking about just like commonsensical IT principles in play within the building management system. So rotating passwords, right? Not allowing them to just use password. Or there's a couple other ones that I can think of that's out there. And then, on top of that, one thing that we've really been focusing on is we have something called a security dashboard in our product. And if you haven't taken a look at that, I do encourage you to just, when you get an opportunity to do so, because what that's going to give you is going to give you pretty much a one-stop shop on the security robustness of your instance. So let's say, for example, that you choose to degrade a certain security-related parameter within your instance. You're going to see that show up as a warning on your security dashboard. We want it to be as clear to you as possible that you're aware that what you're choosing to do could represent something that could be potentially leveraged for a cyber attack or something else like that. So, and then in addition to that, we give you some more details and feedback on why this represents something that could create or contribute to another attack vector. So it's providing that kind of essential general feedback onto if you make a certain decision, here is what can possibly happen. And it'll also give you an opportunity to select the right one. And so it starts when you are creating a new Niagara instance, we are secure by default. That means all of the security related parameters have been set for you. And so that when you get started, you're starting from square one from the right spot.
All right. All right, Jim, I'm going to give you a question, see if you can answer it this time. There's another trend that I've seen with clients today, and they're really excited about what product manufacturers are doing to be cyber secure and live securely on their network. Whether it's a network that the MSI is providing or whether it's a network that's a corporate enterprise. But one of the attack vectors that I think is less understood is what happens when I install that software on a PC, a server, and who's providing the server? How hardened does it have to be? And I know in the industrial world that was the way for so long. And then what happens with products? And I don't want to say all of them, but I'll just use probably one you guys all know, TeamViewer, right? And what happens with products like that? And there's lots of them. There's a bunch of open source ones out there, and those are things that you'll find, and they're hard to find in an enterprise. Not so hard to find if you got 3 or 4 buildings, because you can look at those in a day. But it is complicated when you start having people providing servers, installing their own software. How should MSIs, how should IT organizations really go about vetting that stuff?
Very interesting question. I think that one of the challenges we face is everybody wants to install their own thing that makes their life a little easier, more convenient. And we have to be brave enough to say no at every level. Even the people that are doing the work and hands-on in the equipment need to have the knowledge to realize that even though that might be an easier way to do it, and you don't have to remember passwords or use a password manager or whatever it is, or I can give remote access and see everything, they need to be aware of the fact that they've created a weakness that, like Stephen pointed out, that they created a weakness that just they shouldn't have created, and then they haven't thought it through. So the challenge, and it's funny. I was sitting beside an electrical engineer on the plane last night. We were having a chat. She works for a major food company, and at one point she said, "Hey, could you take a look at my phone? It won't do a bunch of stuff I wanted to do." And I went, "Oh, wait a minute, I know who you work for." and she goes, "What's the problem?" And I went, "Well, first of all, I shouldn't hand you your phone. I'm the wrong guy. I'm actually a good guy because I'm an ethical guy, but I'm the wrong guy you want to hand the phone to, because that can break your phone. It can make it sending messages off your phone." So the challenge is that her company is smart enough and has enough IT experience in that space. It's a major food manufacturer, that they implemented rules on all those phones so that even if they handed it to me, I really couldn't do much. But that's not true of our industry for the most part. Most people, we hand them a computer and a phone and they do whatever they want with it to a certain extent. And, we loan that piece of equipment to them to do their job. But when they start installing it and doing stuff with it and putting things on it, let their kid play on it at night, it just creates all kinds of havoc for the industry in general.
Yeah, exactly. Greg, I'm going to ask you a question from your facility manager experience. So common practice, unfortunately, is integrators, facility managers, facility engineers, they like to use that same password. There's nothing, and the end user, so there's nothing more frustrating than using a tool like Niagara, going into an audit log to find out who changed the set point that shuts the shower plant down. And all you see is 50,000 rows of admin is the user. Admin did it all, but who really was that? I guarantee it wasn't the same person doing 50,000 different things. So, Greg, how do you, as a facility manager, how do you enforce that and kind of break this 30-year-old habit?
Wow. I think it starts with something that they practice on the IT side, right? A cybersecurity policy. And not just the policy, but a policy that's living, breathing, and being utilized. That thing has to be implemented. There has to be someone who's overseeing it and making sure that the rest of the staff is adhering to the policy. And that's one of the things that should be in a really strong cybersecurity policy, including things like disaster recovery and all that other good stuff that the IT world is familiar with. But it starts there with the cybersecurity policy. And when we're out talking about cybersecurity to end users and to consulting engineers, that's one of the 4 things that I talk about, right? Talk about encrypted data, talk about managed switches, talk about physical firewalls, but really talking to your owner about implementing cybersecurity policy. Now, when engineers go to design systems, because it all goes back to the consulting engineers, we know that there's a lot of negotiated work out there. The MSIs primarily work on negotiated projects, but our world still lives and breathes through the plan and spec world, right? And the plan and spec world, the trusted advisors that experience that are the consulting engineers. So they're the, let's say, let's just say they're the trusted advisors for the owners. So one of the things they should be putting out there is a design guideline for a cybersecurity policy to make sure that those passwords and things like that are being updated and people are being removed from directories and things like that.
You want to take a shot at that? Yeah.
I love Greg just hit it on the head. But one thing that I realized is that when you're commissioning a control system, building an automation system, that was delivered through Division 25, right? But let's say it's sitting on something that's specified in 28. Of course, it has some ties with 27 too. Do you think that commissioning agent that comes by is checking on that, on those users, to ensure how many super users do I have configured if it's an I-grade instance, for example? They're not. That's a fundamental gap that we can cover. And the gains that we will all be able to realize as a result of having that baked into the commissioning process is something that I think is just going to continue to pay benefits going forward. And again, shameless product plug, the security dashboard can be your easy way just for the commissioning agent to be able to check on that.
You got to be careful. Scott's going to blow up here in a second.
I know.
Yeah, Jim, I was curious. Obviously, your newest venture that you're doing with Melissa, how is that going to be able to contribute to actually fixing this problem? Because this is a problem that's not going away right now, right?
Yeah, so I'm semi-retiring later this year, and I'm gonna be the CTO and the dean of curriculum and faculty for cybersecurity course that will be offered through Automation Strategy and Performance. And what we're doing, basically, I'm pulling together the people that I know are the best of the best that have written books like me on cybersecurity. I wrote a book on a very practical approach to cybersecurity and the safety management systems, which is basically the equipment we use in the process industry to keep things from blowing up. So practical approaches, practical steps to solve the problem. So what I'm going to go do personally now is basically roll out a cybersecurity course for workforce solution type approach, where we're going to actually teach people that are coming up through your companies so that they can engage the IT department, so they can have a conversation with the cybersecurity team on site, so they can actually even do a cybersecurity assessment to a certain level, or vulnerability assessment as it's commonly referred to in our world. I'm not going to teach them how to hack, but they're going to learn a little bit, because to really do the job well, you got to know how to take it apart too, right? So, but the idea is to actually, instead of teaching classes that have like 10 guys in it, we want to teach literally, thousands a month so that we can thousands a year, so that we can actually change the industry quickly. And the federal government's actually backing the effort, which is very interesting. And so are the states, and so is the Veterans Administration. So they're all stepping up and saying, we like that. Go teach as many people as you can, get them more aware so that they can engage. They can go, hey, where is your cybersecurity policy before I turn the system on and hook it up? What's your policy about how this is handled? Which port should I use? What level of security do you expect in my system? How am I going to do remote access so that people can do it? How do I set up my passwords? All those kind of things need to be, that dialogue needs to happen with IT. And the problem a lot of us have, and it's one of the reasons when I left Tritium, I immersed myself in this business, was I realized as a vice president of Tritium, I didn't know enough about cybersecurity, quite frankly. And it was starting to come up more and more. And it was like, you know what? I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to get really deep into this and figure it out. I don't live or work there anymore. I'm in Ohio. Thank the good Lord. But Ohio's a very peaceful place. And in Ohio, I actually went out and started doing projects, actual real hands-on projects in difficult places. And we bring the IT in. To answer one other question in addition to policy, one of the things, so I was doing a project right before COVID hit over in the Middle East at the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. And I was out in the empty quarter in the desert at these facilities that they had in the middle of no man's land, and trying to do cybersecurity assessments. One of the things that fascinated me the most is out at the very edge, I would walk around the corner and there would be like this really nice, like the expo signs you see down on the floor out here, this really nice sign. And it was reminding people of, make sure your passwords are secure and you're using a password manager. It was, do not write passwords on the bottom of the keyboard. You think I'm kidding, right? This Stuxnet attack on Iran was because of the photographs that were taken of Ahmadinejad when he walked through the building. They figured out how to attack the Iranian centrifuge program, which was buried in a mountain, nowhere on a map. No one was supposed to know it was there, and it was not connected to the internet. And and somebody still managed to attack that place and take it down, damage it through cyber attack. So barriers are really important. Knowledge is super important. Constantly reminding people in your shops. So a lot of you guys were integrators. In your shop, you should have signs up to remind people about cybersecurity. Just constantly enforcing that thing so that when they get in, okay, in the political world, when you're driving to a voting booth, if you see a sign for somebody 3 times, you have a 70% higher chance of voting for that person. That's weird. But the same thing's true when you're trying to enforce things like cybersecurity. You got to show them over and over again on a regular basis. I remind myself constantly of all the cybersecurity rules so that I don't forget. But and to your point, how many users are there? What rights do they have? I never saw software developers scream more at Tritium or at Rockwell Automation than when they took away admin rights to their computers. But you got it. You just don't have a choice.
Yeah, I think the thing that I appreciate what you said, Jim, the most is the last answer where you said you just got to be brave. You've got to actually start making the tough decisions. I've been part of some very successful deployments with IT leading the helm for cybersecurity. And we informed them, educated them on everything we need to best serve the building and the client and everything. And then they did their best to meet as many of those requests as they could in a cybersecure way. So there are ways. I mean, even things like, it used to have us, if we went to a tech firm or something, they would give us laptops that we had to work on, which is very inconvenient for our technicians. They could only be on site. There was no secure access, nothing remote. Couldn't use any of the tools on their own laptop, so it's a really difficult thing. Well, today, some of those companies have moved to a USB dongle. And as long as you have that USB dongle and it's been authenticated to the network for the period of time, you can get on there. Again, you still need users, and you have to have passwords, and they're enforcing all of those things on those contractors, which is fantastic because they're taking control. They're being brave, and we need to see more and more people doing that. Real quick, Greg, before we go, I got about 5 to 10 more minutes of letting these guys talk. And then I'd like to have at least 15 minutes of questions. So if you guys start thinking about your questions, we'll get to those quickly. I have 2 more topics. One is I want to just back up what Jim was saying. I know his program, the company is CTO for, talks a lot about apprenticeship. But this cybersecurity discussion needs to be relearned by everyone. If you've been in this industry for 10 years, congratulations. Take that course. Take it again and again and again. That's not just an apprenticeship course. The last topic I'd like you guys to touch on before we go to questions, and I'd like all 3 of you to touch on it, are things like certificate management. Talking about all these devices everywhere, we want to have them sending encrypted data back and forth. Well, that's a lot of certificate management. When you're dealing with hundreds of computers in a building or in a school versus tens of thousands of network connected devices, how is that going to happen? Great.
I'm going to talk to these.
Actually, I'm going to punt. I don't know.
You don't know?
That's a great question. It's a complex problem. So I'm thinking.
Steven.
No, I think it's got to start with the IT department, right? So if there's no IT department in place and system integrator, you've been the one that's hired to implement this. Well, the charge is upon you. And I think that's why getting yourself back up to speed on all cybersecurity, even 101, and getting all the way to the advanced course is going to be a place to start for the system integrator. But for the entity, the enterprise level customers that have a well-founded IT department in place, you're going to need to work with them at the end of the day. You really are. You can't just go kind of rogue and just start kind of doing your own self-signed certificates and things like that. For example, you are going to want to use, depending on, of course, there's some nuance. If you're in BackNet Secure Connect, you don't use a public CA, right? So you don't go to VeriSign, anything like that. You need to get a CA that the site controls. Now, however, for other things, like for me signing a program object, so one thing that we require, for example, in Micro Framework is that if you got a program that you've written in Java, well, we require that you have to sign it. And you get a code signing certificate for that. So for that, for example, that's where you're going to have to reach out to like a VeriSign, the DigiCert, or something like that. That's where you go through a public CA. But I think in any regard, of course, it starts with education to the folks that don't know about it. But then for the enterprise level customers, it's working with the IT departments. You establish exactly the certificate rotation policy they're going to want to see. Now, what that might require for the SIs out there is that you're going to be making a trip out to the site every single year, because they're going to want to rotate certs every 365 days. So if you're using encrypted communications, so say you're using FoxS, for example, it's something that you're going to have to get into. But I think, one thing I started with is that we want to hear from you on what you need and to see in a product like the Niagara Framework. And some of the things that we've been hearing recently, Brian, has been specifically on this topic. How do I manage certificates when I want to implement a robust policy across my network, and specifically related to those CSRs, because that's a change order for some contracts. That's going to be another thing that's going to hit the customers. The SI is going to have to make a truck roll to go out and do that.
That's why I wanted to touch on this, because you mentioned specifications, right? You mentioned Division 25. I think we as an industry have to decide, where does all this stuff go? Does it go in Division 25? The consulting engineers sitting out in the audience, how many of you actively right now use Division 25 as part of your specification? Okay, so we've got a few. 99% of the engineers I talk to don't even know what Division 25 is. Integrated automation, right? You guys are ahead of the curve, but the rest of the industry has to learn how to use Division 25, what goes in Division 25. Do you guys think that cybersecurity should go on Division 25? By show of hands. Right? So that's something that we need to get out to the industry, because like Stephen just said, that's going to be a change order if you've got certificate management or a robust certificate management process in place, because it's not in the specification. So we need to get on the same page as far as what cybersecurity looks like for OT as an industry. Get it in Division 25, start putting it out there to the industry, and making sure that we manage what that looks like.
Absolutely.
I hate to cut you off.
I think those are great answers, and I appreciate the fact that you both said it's not solved yet, and we don't have a solution for it yet, but it's something that needs to be solved. There's one last thing before we go to questions I'd like the three of you to touch on, and that is something that's kind of an elephant in the room we haven't talked about yet. And BACnet is nice. BACnet Secure Connect is nice, but then there's Modbus, there's OPC, there's wireless, there's LoRaWAN, there's Zigbee, there's all kinds of stuff in Ocean. I mean, there's technologies that are going into buildings. Sometimes people don't even know. Like they're, hey, I got a smart restroom. Well, okay, what communication protocol are all those wireless things all around that restroom talking? And are they a point that is a possible attack? So how are you guys approaching that with your clients? Greg, you're dealing with integrators. Jim, obviously you're dealing with enterprises as well as new students and new entries into this world. How do we start talking intelligently about all of these different protocols and how they can coexist in a whole network? Because I will say, smart buildings with one protocol, nearly impossible right now. There's a lot of different technologies you've got to incorporate. How do you do that in a good way?
I'll go first. I think it's just a matter of making sure that the integrators out there know how to deploy their own IP networks, right? And making sure that the IP network itself is secure. So we get all of those different protocols on one network, and it's easier to manage from that perspective. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think from an IT perspective, you look at all the protocols. We don't really care. It's just traffic, right? Light up Wireshark to look at the data going by. You put filters in to say, yeah, I want to see BACnet, I want to see whatever, right? Modbus. I haven't looked at Modbus lately. I'm hoping they got better. The first network,
It looks like it did.
the first network I learned how to hack was Modbus. And I did a man-in-the-middle attack on Modbus. I went, well, that was interesting. Code from Tritium, I went, wow, I wonder how many electrical meters went in with Modbus. Yeah, a lot. So, no, I think that Yeah, my brain just farted.
That's all right. It happens. Steven, you want to say the day there?
Oh, I know what I was gonna say. No, seriously. How many protocols are on here? Think about it, right?
God knows, right?
So the question, like I said, it relates to the things we carry around in our pocket too. This has a whole bunch of protocols on it. When you get on an airplane, you got to turn a bunch of them off, right? Right? But they still let you use some of them, right? You're going to jump up on a Wi-Fi system. You might have Bluetooth on for your headset. You're using different protocols on a device you hold every day in your hand. So it isn't impossible. And from the IT perspective, it's just traffic, right? But it's a different type of traffic. And sometimes it's deterministic, sometimes it's not deterministic. But I think balancing that with IT, it's not that difficult to do. In my full-time job up till now, I built our IT infrastructure because we had IT and cybersecurity guys mixed together, and they all quit on a project in the Middle East because they're hard. And they all quit, and I was on the board, and they looked at me and went, "You're the only guy here now that knows anything about cybersecurity. Either get a team quickly or go to the Middle East and fix it." And I walked in, and there are hundreds of protocols running on the networks. You go into any of these facilities, they bought stuff from Honeywell, they bought stuff from Siemens, they bought stuff from Yokogawa, they got computer stuff, they got video cameras running on the network. And you're just sitting there going, okay, this is complicated, but from a cybersecurity perspective, I don't care. I'm just gonna go look at that traffic and figure out what's going on, what's talking to what, what's talking to something they shouldn't be talking to. So it's manageable, but I think, so to be fair, this industry and its divorce, if you will, in the build process isn't different than the other industry again, because but in the OT world, talking about industrial control systems now, IT's in the meetings much more. We started pulling IT down into the meetings and saying, look, there has to be a hybrid guy here, somebody who understands OT and IT in the meeting. So let's train an IT guy OT, or let's take an OT guy training IT and make sure they're in all those meetings.
Yeah.
And I think that may be incumbent on our industry to be those people for those companies, because the people who are actually operating a building may not be able to be those people yet.
Yeah.
I'll try to fix that, but it'll take a while.
Stephen, you took up most of your time. You got 30 seconds if you want to chime in with more questions.
I'll let Jim.
All right, perfect. Love to open up some questions. Hopefully we have some. Hopefully somebody said something that sparked an interest. Anyone? Right here.
Just a little off topic, but where do you think, in the case of a breach of a secure system, where does liability stand in terms of all
Great question.
input into the security?
I'll take it.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so he asked, where does the liability stand or lie with a breach? And I will tell you, if you're an integrator, you should have cyber insurance. Absolutely. If you don't have it, don't install your own networks and don't install remote connectivity. And when you're going through your cyber insurance policy, your insurance company is going to ask you to show all the documentation. What are your user policies? What is your networking policy? What are all these things? And if you don't have those, you won't get a policy. So it starts there, and then it's everybody ends up getting named. I mean, that's been our experience. Fortunately, we have seen these things happen. We haven't actually been part of one, but we have seen them where everyone involved that touched it at all, from the supplier of the hardware to the integrator that deployed.
Right, real quick, has your company gone through other like process certifications for cybersecurity? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so yeah, we do a couple of different things. We're a master system integrator, but we're also a software hosting cloud service product provider. And so we had to be cybersecurity trained on two different things and going through different certifications. So as an installer implementer, we go through the normal training you would do for ISA and different things, right? But when you're talking about operating a cloud SaaS solution, it's a whole different layer. And that includes everything from meeting certifications and getting certified for your environment, but it also includes regular pen testing by third parties. So you're not just, there is no self-reporting. there's no self-reported, pen test. It's one of the things that drives me nuts about a self-signed. Like, it's not really secure in any stretch of the way. It's one thing I'd recommend you guys just get rid of. But it's one of those things that they have it because it makes it simpler and faster to deploy a network. But if you're not thinking about it, you end up leaving not really that secure of a network behind. So I don't know, you guys want to add anything else to that?
You know, I had something, when I got out of the Navy, I went to work for an Alabama distributor, Rock Automation now. And we got sued because we couldn't prove we didn't sell a foot switch to Timken. Think about that. We couldn't prove we didn't sell a piece of equipment over the counter to a customer. And we got sued. And our lawyers told us to pay, we couldn't win.
Yeah.
So, and they're going to, if it's bad, if somebody dies or there's a lot of damage or if somebody can't operate their business like Target ended up with, if that happens, they're going to name everybody in the lawsuit, including everyone who's touched that equipment, even maybe the people who built it.
And if you're lucky, you're low on the totem pole and you'll be part of the settlement. It won't cost you the full vote. And you have insurance to cover it. Because those are critical things. Yeah, let's go right back here.
With all the conversation about IT and OT, can you comment on whether you put it all on IT or you have separate IT, OT, or merged, and how you do it, philosophy?
Yeah, so the question is IT versus OT. When does it make sense to be converged and when does it make sense to be separate? And every one of those conversations has to start with whoever is running IT there. As Greg talked about, a 10-story building, the IT group that's going to manage that building might only have IT infrastructure in one room, right? And then it goes back to home run, so they've got that, but the rest of the building and all the technology that's been installed is not managed by that company. And so then it becomes incumbent on, okay, well, who's going to manage this? What responsibility do they want to take and what responsibility they want to outsource? And that's where you can really become a valuable partner for them in managing that piece of the network for them. Greg, I know this is something you get into quite a bit.
Yeah, what we've been promoting is installing a separate OT network, right? With facilities graded hardware and software that's made for us, right? A building engineer can understand it, an MSI can understand it and upsell the management of that network as part of your service contract, right? So now that we emerged and we're all feet in or 2 feet in on IP devices, right? So now let's stand up our own OT network to support those IP devices along with the other technology in the building. Now you've got a full integration, whether it's lighting controls, energy, elevators and escalators, HVAC, the whole 9 yards. Let's pull it all there. Now, you're going to have large enterprise customers that have global IT departments with a ton of people who've already worked out the IT-OT convergence. They've got VLANs and all that good stuff. But the typical building, they don't have that. So what you need to do is start being familiar with the facilities-graded OT solutions that are out there. Learn how to put together good systems integration drawings to go in your package. Because at the end of the day, if you don't assign the work, someone's going to pay for it. So if the owner comes back and says, hey, we need X, Y, and Z to happen as far as cybersecurity, if it's not in the specifications or that piece of hardware isn't showing up in your drawings or specifications anywhere, then you're going to have to pay additionally for it. So we recommend to start being solutions providers when it comes to standing up your own IP network.
Yeah, there's also a couple other, and I'll get right back to you. There's a couple other things related to that. So if you do this, if you do what Greg's suggesting, the number one thing you get is a lot of good experience and a lot of good context. Because when you do get to that enterprise IT, or one of your customers that you deploy for suddenly wants to bring it into corporate IT, you have the knowledge of how to talk to them about what needs specifically for those systems, right? Like, I don't want your scanning software to turn off all my lighting control panels because it doesn't talk incessantly. It talks once a minute or something. And so it's deemed to be, a non-native device or something like that. So there's definitely things that are very specific to OT that by being very cyber aware, being networking aware, you're going to be able to work in either one of those worlds, whether you're providing that IT environment or playing within it.
Resources that 7 years ago, there was no division. You were an IT guy stuck in a control world trying to figure out what's broke.
Yeah.
Using different protocols that they've never heard of, ports that they've never heard of. On the IT, OT side, we opened up a port we've never heard of. They're two different worlds. What we're seeing over the last 7 years, Department of Homeland Security has a buttload of 3 courses today that deal with the OT IT. OT IT. Used to be CISSP was the thing to have if you're going to run. Those CISSPs don't know they live out of building automation control system. They will be the first guy to mess it up. And they'll pen test it 30 days after you install it. Right.
Yeah.
Well, now you've got GLSIC, which focuses at that same level of IP, internet, cybersecurity, push the buttons, configure the VLANs and all that stuff, but it's wrapped around industrial controls. You don't let industrial controls run you away if you're a building automation system. I've been integrated since R1. I've learned all the proprietary stuff. I came out of the computer world because it was boring and you didn't do anything. Now all of a sudden we could fix things, make things work, and it was cool.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden everybody started hacking our systems because we started plugging everything into the IP network.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is, start at home, get you somebody that can understand. Don't quit worrying about that CISSP level knowledge, securing OT. If you're not ready to plug it into a Cat5, try to hack data on a Modbus loop. If you don't have a table and you're not sitting in front of that machine plugged into it, you're not getting nothing. So remember that. If you're not ready, don't do it.
Yeah. Anybody, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I will add that when you go into the industrial world's done a pretty good job at this in general. There are some companies that are really bright shining stars in this marketplace or in this problem. The IT and OT still operate separately, right? The OT space is very deterministic. We don't let our switches run above. We don't even let our switches at either hit 50%.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases because we're doing deterministic comms, right? A lot of cases, not so much in the building automation space. You're running an automobile assembly line, you're sending a signal to a robot, it's got to go like within 10 milliseconds, right? So we keep the network separate, and then we bring them together. It looks like an hourglass at a choke point, and we build a bulletproof firewall, very discreet, with very well-defined rules of how data moves through that firewall. We might create a DMZ and actually put a buffer to buffer the data, like you got to connect it to automated demand response. You do it through a buffer. You don't make a direct connection all the way out from your OT world to some server at the electric company, right? So it is a manageable relationship between the two. I do like a nuclear power industry, they actually build all their control systems are actually protected. They're air gap, first of all, completely air gap, and they're protected by guys that wear guns. They take it very seriously. They scan everything. They don't, the rules are extreme, and they still get attacked every now and then, right? Some vendor walks in with a USB stick in his pocket that managed to get you a metal detector. It goes, hey, I got this really cool thing I just downloaded, sticks it in, and voila, malware in a completely air gap system. So there are, you manage the choke point, you manage when you're hooking up to this stuff, you write policies and procedures of how to do it, you work with IT.
Yeah.
If you can't speak IT, if they make you uncomfortable in the room because they use a bunch of words, acronyms, and numbers and protocols you don't know, just start training your workforce so they can sit in the room and answer the questions.
Well, ask them. Like that's I like to say, you'll never learn without asking questions, right? So when you're in the room and they're using acronyms and protocols and things you don't understand, ask. What's that for? What's that used for? I've seen that in my Jace. I never knew what it was. Be vulnerable, right? And when you're vulnerable with IT, they will absolutely help you out and create that. We got time for one last question. Yes.
How do you guys solve when I'm in the field, what I see is that we have a lot of knowledgeable guys who work on the building automation system, But because of the liability aspect and everybody worrying, well, whose problem is it? It turns to be a hands-off thing. Like, I don't want to learn that. And so how do we solve that problem on minimizing, there's a fear factor from the individual where they don't want to actually want to learn something because they're scared. And they're like, not my problem, it's IT's problem. So now you have two divisions that are not speaking to each other because everybody's like pointing the fingers.
Yeah.
So
Stand up your own IP networks.
No, I think,
yeah,
that works for a lot of buildings, but not everyone. And
yeah,
so,
because I work in a lot of hospitals.
yeah, I think it starts with taking responsibility as the people who are deploying these systems and getting yourself trained, and that starts with leadership of companies. If you're dealing with cyber and you don't have a cyber security policy, then you're not understanding how serious that you should be taking, right? And so that's part of you as a facility manager, as a developer, as an engineer, starting to vet your bidders more tightly. And the more that we specify that, hey, if you're going to deal in the cyber world, you have to have this level of insurances and certifications, then you're going to start getting more people doing it. More people are going to get trained.
And then now, it's so many layers because
It is.
I don't even have to touch any of the HIPAA stuff, and they're requiring me
Yes.
to have a $5 million cybersecurity. I'm like, are you guys kidding me?
Yeah.
And now, so you have the increase in the cost of the cybersecurity insurance. Then you now have to worry about finding the trained people in order to even do these things. So now your contracts become so much higher, and then now they go for the lowest bidder. So what happens?
I don't know.
It's an issue.
Scott, do you want to make a comment?
Just a quick comment to close it out because you're hitting the time, but
Yeah, this is Scott Cochrane, as you probably know. Thank you, Scott, for hosting this whole day. This is
Yeah,
great.
thank you, Brian. It's a wonderful panel. I just want to say when you look at the building automation industry and you wonder why we have a cybersecurity problem, just so you all know, it's Tritium's fault. What happened was like 20 years ago, they put a web server in our hands and told us to put it in a building. And we were like, no way, really? So we did. And then what happened was the operators in the building were like, dude, if you put that on my network, I can see that in my office. And we were like, okay, let's do it. Okay, folks, 20 years later, we made an epic mistake, just so you know. So not only is it a problem going forward, I just want to point out that we have 20 years of install base that needs to be addressed. And you mentioned about people, what do you do with people? You tell them, guess what? This is the way it's going to be now, period. Because we're not going backwards. So as an industry, just so we know, and I'll just point out one other thing. You know I couldn't keep my mouth shut, but this is also the biggest opportunity this industry's seen in terms of new business opportunity, folks. Whether you sell service contracts, whether you sell systems, it doesn't matter. This is all important now, and it's all new business to us as an industry. So don't be scared of it, embrace it, right? So anyway, I'll close with that. You guys, awesome. Brian, panel, thank you guys.